Welcome to another episode of the IFC's Individuation Podcast. I'm Dr. Lahab El Samurai. With me today is Dr. Lisa Hong and Dr. Eric Tomlinson, and we are the three doctors. So, as three doctors, we're going to prescribe something for your migraine. But before we go there, we thought we'd get into some strange things, ghosts, spirits, or demons. So, Von Franz in chapter 15, Ghost Spirits as Demons, um, starts to talk about the tormenting psychic complex. And she talks about it as it's illustrated in the fairy tales that we will be reading. So, what is this tormenting psychic complex? So what happens in the psyche, in the system, is that the more the complex becomes consolidated, the more independent it becomes, the more of it's almost like it has its own life force, has its own dimension, has its own kind of power that is outside the usual complexes. What could happen is that the energy um, that the complex is leeching off of becomes so great that it splits off. So what you have is like a bad feeling around, like something that's getting into uh, under your skin. Some people call it a ghost, some people call it an apparition, some people call it, but in von Franz is talking about that this is the complex actually, and this is the split of the complex. So what we do know about the complexes so far is that they surpass space and time. They exist in their own, and they exist over the millennia. They're eternal. They don't die. So the complexes are a lot more um, sophisticated in the way they are created and understood than we give them credit for. We seem to think that uh, it's something that is has to be defeated or has to be taken down. You can't really take it down. What you do is you move energy from its core so it can't leach off more and more energy. So I think today, a great example, one of the clients was talking about uh, how this is about victory and defeat. It wasn't about treatment, which is fascinating because only the complex could come up with that. Oh, I feel like you would win and I would lose. Well, that's very interesting. The treatment is to make you help feel better and more integrated. Well, when you start talking like that, what you are basically what you're showing is that there are complexes that have a far reach into the psyche and that are very, very strong. And you were just getting a taste of the complex coming out to play. So when we say complexes, what we mean is that these are um, psychic existing entities that occupy uh, a feeling state and that can be torturous because that feeling state is disconnected from um, the person's own internal mechanism. It's kind of being held in its own um, space, far away. It's hard to touch.
Or it holds the space hostage.
It holds everything near
Everything.
it drags everything. Like, so if you have like an asteroid belt, it would drag that asteroid belt all around it and like keep flinging things at it.
Mm-hmm.
So it gains momentum through the pulling, the aggression, that it requires, that energy to pull it out. So what it does is, when you say you're triggering, when somebody's triggered, what you're doing is, that's the energy that's required by the complex to kick in.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this like, ah, and suddenly it starts like to bloom. It gets bigger and bigger. I become more and more angry. I become more and more argumentative and conflictual. I become more and more not giving back and forth. I just like, stay away from me. Um, so it starts to get energized. And so when the complex gets energized, so if you think about it, so if you're traumatized at a much earlier age and these complexes arose, then what you have is, not only are they independent, but psychically they're so disassociated, because you hadn't the ability to integrate before they split off. They split off before integration occurred, before the consolidation where the ego kind of steps in and starts to say, I'm in charge. Before that happens, so any split, before that happens, what you have is a regressive aspects of the psyche that takes you to that complex, and that complex is childlike in consciousness, and therefore very tenacious, will not give up, will not negotiate, will hold on to the issue, will be angrier and angrier about the same issue. But you're not making me feel better, but I'm not being taken care of, because you have not fulfilled that thing in me that's missing. That happened way before my identity started to create. Because it's consciousness, right? And identity is consciousness. You become conscious of yourself. You didn't, it's not like it's written on paper. You start to become more and more aware of yourself, your ability to do things, the ability to move in the world, to communicate in the world. Before then, you are still in an unconscious state. You're part of everything, the surroundings, you're part of the planet. So when a trauma hits at that developmental phase and that split occurs, what you are dealing with is a lost fragment, because you can't pinpoint it. You can't say, oh, this is part of this complex. It's an independent, split off piece of psyche that has its own judgment, has its own will, has its own force, and can muster up all the energy that you think you have and deplete you, and function as an energized state where you become more and more charged up, charged up, charged up. And as soon as the other person thinks that you're charging down, you're actually charging more up. You're like spinning that wheel, and you keep spinning that wheel. And the other person is like, well, they could choose to engage, but it doesn't matter if they engage or not, because you are in perpetual motion at that point. So unless you crash into something, you are going to keep going. And so the complex becomes completely disconnected, in charge, separate. And this is where we talk about multiple personality disorders and dissociative states, because then that's an independent personality, which you have there. It's complex, split off, and she calls it this tormenting psychic complex is split off. Now it has its own personality. And when you meet it, you clearly know that you're dealing with something that's very regressive, very dark, very archaic, very complicated to unravel, move around, take it out of step. So today, we're going to talk about how the psychic system splits off through two fairy tales. And Eric is going to run us through the first fairy tale. Eric, you want to give us the title of the fairy tale and read the fairy tale to us?
Yeah, it's called The Moon. And if I may give some background, because the background is really important for this one. I love, as I've said before, first of all, let me say, these last several podcasts, when you give an introduction, the introductions that you have given have been terrific. They've helped get me in the mindset. They've helped put me on that plane that I need to be thinking about in order to really more deeply understand what's going on, the specifics of the narration that we read. So I just wanted to thank you for that. I don't think I'm the only one that has recognized that, by the way.
Well, thank you.
Really helpful, Dr. Lahab. Thank you. One of the reasons that I love and I've studied them for a number of years to study ancient cultures is because of two reasons. One is they very much stay close to the earth. They stay close to nature. They stay close to basic fundamental aspects of existence. But more importantly, why I love it is because they're also much more spiritual minded. And I don't even want to say spiritual minded. I want to say, because that implies so many things that are negative to so many people, but they're really in touch with what goes beyond the consciousness. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. And this is one of those groups. And they reminded me a lot of a culture I studied called the Yanomami, which lived in the general same area. These people are called the Coxic Naua. Now, that name is very distasteful to them. They view it as an insult because it means bat people or cannibals or those, or get this, those who walk in the night. So they don't like that term. So because it's not what they call themselves. They call themselves, if you ever want to look them up, they're called the Huni Kuan. And I felt bad about them when I first saw that this was still being utilized. And then I found out that they called another group, the Kulina, they called them the Pininawa, which means those who stink. So they do the same thing. They call other people names too, you know, so it's not just, they're not just victims in the name calling. Anyway, let me read this story. There's only about 10,000 of them left, by the way, because just like in the Congo, Europe devastated millions of Congolese because of the rubber industry through slavery and killing. The Brazilians did the same thing to many of their native populations too. I'm surprised that there's 10,000 of them even left. But here's the story, and they're you got to remember, these people are very, very in tune and very focused on the soul, what we call the soul. They used a substance like many of the people in the Amazon forest used called ayahuasca. Some people, generally people have heard it called that, or yaji, or Banisterius Kayapi, or Harmaline. There's a variety of names for it. It's basically a drug called DMT. dimethyltryptamine. And it affects, among many other things, the pineal gland, which is considered by many spiritualists the third eye. You might have heard that expression before, or the God particle. And so they're very much into thinking about what's beyond the obvious level of consciousness. Here's the story. A Kutanaua insidiously murdered a Maranaua in the forest. These are two tribes. The murderer impaled his head on a stick and planted it in the middle of the road and then hid nearby. Another Maranaua came along and saw that the head was not dead, but that the eyes were shining, the eyelashes twitched, and the mouth was open. The man became afraid. He sat down and grieved, and then ran back to his village. The head was left alone, hanging there. He cried and his tears dropped down. Now, to this culture, the head is representative of
Story,
the dead.
Eric, stay with
Yeah.
the story, please. Finish the story.
The Maranaua brought their friend's head back to the village in a basket. But the head bit through the basket and fell out. When they put him in the basket, he again bit through and fell out. They left the head lying there on the road and went away. But the head rolled along behind them, following them as they fled. It even crossed a river after them. The head saw the people eating fruit and asked for some too. To calm him down, they threw him fruit. But when the head ate it, the food fell out through the hole in his neck. They threw the next piece of fruit intentionally as far as possible, and the head rolled after it. Quickly, they all got up and ran off again. When the head no longer saw his comrades, it rolled along behind them again, pleading to them to wait for him. He wanted to go home with them, but they ran into their huts and closed the doors tightly behind them. The head rolled around the hut that he used to live in, crying. Then he decided to transform himself. He thought of a number of forms he could change into, like a fruit or a plant. He rejected these forms because his family would then eat him. He thought, maybe the earth. No, people would walk all over me. Maybe water. No, people would drink me. Animals. No, people would kill me. A tree. No, they will cut me down. What should I become? I think I'll become something else. My blood I will transform in the rainbow. My eyes I will transform into stars, and my head shall become the moon. Then the head of the Maranaua called out to his people and spoke, friends, my head will become the moon. When my eyes are stars and my blood the rainbow, then all you women and girls will bleed. The people looked up at the sky. See how Maranaua's head has become the full moon. He transformed his eyes into those stars and his blood into that rainbow. That is what the people said. Maranaua was beheaded by the Kutanaua, and he transformed his head into the moon.
What's the name of the fairy tale?
The moon.
Okay. So, any thoughts on the moon? Lisa, any thoughts?
Sounds like a sad story. But the end is supposed to be as inspiring somehow.
Well, and the moon is obviously a symbol for them, and it has a lot of meaning related to the effects that it has on people, or they wouldn't be mentioning the bleeding of women and girls. They're obviously, in my mind, talking about the menstrual cycle, which peoples have known about for centuries, and
Well, it's a creation myth, right?
related it to the moon. So
It's a creation myth, right?
yeah,
About the moon and about the moon cycle.
there's even a disorder, late luteal dysphoric disorder in the DSM, which relates to the moon and relates to women's menstrual cycle.
Okay.
So it's kind of an accepted understanding the world over. So they thought the moon was powerful.
Mhm.
Hmm. We still think the moon is powerful. Okay. It's interesting story. I think that part of the story, the interesting part is the decapitation part, where you have a separate head, and the head, well, you know, the seat. So you have the mind and the body, and the mind and the body are separate, and the body is kind of aimlessly wandering, and the mind is aimlessly wandering. There's a split there. There's a split between the body and the mind. Here, symbolized by the head as a symbol. So then the head is also functioning as a body, and that's where it becomes a little kind of um, disturbed, where it eats something and then it craps it out of its neck. So it's still kind of connected to the body.
Well, and I was going to mention earlier that this culture believed that the head was the repository of the soul.
Okay. Yeah. So the seat of the soul. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's interesting, and this is the complex, right? The complex of um, the tormenting psychic complex that breaks off, that spins off by itself, and has its own free will, and kind of spooks everybody, and scares everybody into um, watching out for it. It's interesting. Any other thoughts, Eric, on the?
No, not really.
Hmm. Lisa, I thought we'd read another fairy tale as long as we're in the vein of like spooky fairy tales. I think that's an interesting fairy tale. Um, would you like to read the Fireball?
Sure. Sure, this is called the Fireball. And I'll just start reading. Well, actually, I'll start with two definitions because they come up again and again in this story. The main one is Tunuk, and the Tunuk in this story is the translation means skeleton. However, many derivations of that word also can describe ghosts or spirits or devils. So we'll think of those images accordingly based on context. And the other word is Kashim, and Kashim just means place of assembly. First Nations tribe. Very long ago in the village of Kinigun, the Cape of Prince Wales, there lived a poor orphan boy who had no one to care for him. He was treated badly by everyone, being made to run here and there at the bidding of all the villagers. One evening, he was sent out on a frivolous task without his skin boots. It being winter, he did not wish to go, but he was driven out by the others. The people continued to send him on such errands until at last he came back and told them that he had seen a great ball of fire like the moon coming over the hill not far away. The people laughed at him and made him go out again. Now he saw that fireball had come nearer until it was quite close. The orphan ran inside telling what he had seen and hid himself because he was frightened. Soon after this, the people in the Kashim saw a fiery figure dancing in the gut skin hovering over the roof hole, and directly afterwards a human skeleton came crawling into the room through the passageway, creeping on its knees and elbows. When it came into the room, the skeleton made a motion towards the people, causing all of them to fall upon their knees and elbows in the same position taken up by the skeleton. Then, turning around, it crawled out as it had come this time, followed by the people who were forced to go after it. Outside, the skeleton crept away from the village, followed by all the men, and in a short time, every one of them was dead, and the skeleton had vanished. Some of the villagers had been absent when the skeleton or tunuk came, and when they returned, they found dead people lying on the ground all about. Entering the Kashim, they found the orphan boy, who had told them of how the people had been killed. After this, they followed the tracks of the tunuk through the snow and were led up the side of the mountain until they came to a very ancient grave where the tracks ended. A few days later, the brother of one of the men who had been killed went fishing upon the sea ice far from the village. He stayed late, and it became dark while he was still a long way from home. As he was walking along, the tunuk suddenly appeared before him and began to cross back and forth in his path. The young man tried to pass by and escape, but could not. The tunuk kept in front of him, do what he might. As he could not think of anything else, he suddenly took a fish out of his basket and threw it at the tunuk. When he threw the fish, it was frozen hard, but as it was thrown and came near the tunuk, it turned suddenly back, passing over the young man's shoulders, and fell into his basket again, where it began to flop about, having become alive. Then the fisherman pulled off one of his dogskin mittens and threw it at the tunuk. As it fell near the spirit, the mitten suddenly changed into a dog, which ran growling and snarling around the apparition, distracting its attention. The young man was able to dart by and run as fast as he could toward the village. When he had gone part of the way, he was again stopped by the tunuk, and at the same time a woman's voice from overhead said, "Untie his feet, they are bound with a cord." But he was too badly frightened to obey. He then threw his other mitten, and it too changed into a dog, delaying the tunuk as the first one had done. The young man ran off as fast as he could and fell exhausted near the door of the Kashim, and the tunuk came up. The latter passed very near without seeing him and went into the house. Finding no one there, it came out and went away. The young man then got up and went home, but he did not dare tell his mother what he had seen. The following day, he went fishing again, and on his way came to a man lying in the path whose face and hands were black. When he drew near, the black man told him to get on his back and close his eyes. When the young man did this, they flew together and stopped just before a house. Nearby was a pretty young woman. She spoke to him, saying, why did you not do as I told you the other night when the tunuk pursued you?" He replied that he had been afraid to do it. The woman then gave him a magic stone as an amulet to protect him from the tunuk in the future. Then the black man again took him back on his back, and when he opened his eyes, he was home. After this, the young man claimed to be a shaman, but he thought continually of the beautiful young woman he had seen, so that he did not have much power. At last, his father said to him, "You are no shaman. You will make me ashamed of you. Go somewhere else." The next morning, the young man left the village at daybreak and was never heard of again.
What do we think of this story? What do we think of the last part? You're not a shaman. What is that about? How does the father complex come into this in the end? And why is it so mean?
Well,
Why
his
is it?
father's not approving of him.
Well, yes, definitely. I mean, there's a conflict, right? There's something wrong with the relationship. But the first part of it is he's an orphan. A poor orphan boy who had no one to care for him. He was treated badly by everyone, being made to run here and there at the bidding of the villagers. On the evening, he was sent out on a frivolous task without his skin boots. It being winter, he did not wish to go, but he was driven out by the others. The people continued to send him on such errands until at last he came back and told them that he'd seen a great ball of fire, like the moon, coming over the hill not far away. So this is one of the primordial symbols of life. It's the sun, and here it's like the moon, and here it's coming over the hill. The people laughed at him, made him go out again. So we have several different complexes um, that are being pointed out in this fairy tale. So the first one is that the complex of the orphan. In the complex of the orphan grows up with nobody that loves him. He never had a mother, or she never had a mother. There's nobody to love you. You're not loved in the world. You arrive in the world without love. That's the complex. And therefore, whatever you do, love is always something that was never given to you, because the original person who should have imprinted with you, bonded with you, made you feel like you are wanted in the world was not there. And that's the orphan complex. So this kid is not loved, but the story doesn't hide it. Nobody cares about this kid. Nobody listens to this kid. Um, so he warns them. Um, the orphan ran inside, telling what he had seen, hid himself because he was frightened. Soon after this, people in Kashim saw a fiery figure dancing on the gut skin, covering over the roof hole. And directly afterwards, a human skeleton came crawling into the room through the passageway, creeping on its knees and elbows. When it came into the room, the skeleton made a motion towards the people, causing all of them to fall upon their knees and elbows in the same position, taken by the skeleton. So this is a collective complex. They all responded. Outside, the skeleton crept away from the village, followed by all the men. In a short time, every one of them was dead, and the skeleton had vanished. And so when you're consumed by a cultural complex and it explodes out in a war, you end up dying. Or in paranoia, you don't take medicine for a certain disease, you die of it. Some of the villagers had been absent when the skeleton of Tangho came, and then they returned. They found dead people lying on the ground all about. Entering the Kashim, they found the orphan boy who told them how the people had been killed. After this, they followed the tracks of the Tenhuk through the snow and were led up the side of the mountain till they came to a very ancient grave where the tracks ended. And he went back to his grave. A few days later, the brother of one of the men who had been killed went fishing upon the sea ice far from the village. He stayed late and it became dark while he was still a long way from home. And he was walking along the tunnel, suddenly appeared before him and began to cross back and forth in his path. So these are split off complexes that are terrorizing people around them. They're creating chaos and death. So from one end, the complexes can be squabbling figures internally. And in this chapter, what von Franz points out is that ghosts, spirits, and demons, the complexes can be vicious. And if they are split off from the psychic system, they create havoc because it's like a psychic infection at this point. You have this complex that's roaming, is triggering everybody. And so as they are triggered, this causes a catastrophe and they all die. So she goes on to talk about, at the end, I wanted to read this part. She says, in these two fairy tales, the transition is described particularly impressively. The head of the dead hunter is fully human, angered and saddened at his own death. Gradually, so there's the split of the complex. The hunter's head has been cut off, but he's angry. And so therefore, he was never able to metabolize it. So it stayed as an energy. As they cut his head off, that energy stayed. The dead is dead. The head is gone, but the energy stayed. So now you have like a trapped vacuum of energy. And this is what we're talking about when we're talking about the complexes. The complexes are, in a lot of ways, very adaptable because they're defense mechanisms, because they're ancient, because they're their own gods. They don't have a god. You're not their god. They're their own gods. And that's why they create so much havoc. And that's why they manipulate you, they drag you around, they terrorize you, they tell you stories about yourself that are not true, they confuse you, they make you sick, they make you angry, they make you tired, they make you feel remorseful, all these things. That's the complex.
And they seem insatiable. I mean, they basically took care of an entire village, and then the rest of the village came back and they still weren't through.
They're their own gods.
Yeah.
They're their own gods. They're their own entity. They exist within themselves. And what happened is this village has committed some form of crime. Because the warning comes from the orphan boy. He tells them something bad is coming. Something really, really bad is coming. Like a plague, like something really, really bad. In this case, it's a lot of energy. It's like a ball of fire, a fireball. And then it turns into a dancing skeleton on fire. Well, that means something happened, right? They must have done something. This is one of these are ghosts, demons, and spirits that come back to haunt. They must have done something. Something must have happened. The story doesn't come out of nowhere because the wreckage and the death that it leaves behind, maybe it's a warning of how not to treat your enemies.
It seems it's a manifestation of the boy's consciousness
And that's,
because in retaliation for their neglect and collective abuse of him, because they insist on his frivolous tests. And
yeah. So the symbol of the rage, the rage is coming from the child, but it's dissociated. The complex is disassociated. It's coming from the child, but it's disassociated. It's not with the child. He's
this
actually,
child hides.
yeah, he hides, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's terrified of it.
Mm-hmm.
He knows. He knows he carries all this like rage. So he tries to warn them that his rage might kill them.
So is the child also that fisherman later? Why are these two stories one story?
Well, so the story is a collective story. It's about different figures, but it's one system.
Hmm.
It's not a separate system. She starts out with talking about the child as the collective guilt of the village.
Mm.
When she starts to like, because nobody, he's poor, he's an orphan, and no one cares for him. She starts out with that, and then she goes, and was treated badly by everyone, and then being made to run here, there, and bidding of all the villagers. So he was the scapegoat. They kept projecting on him all their crap. So um, the brother of one of the men who had been killed went fishing upon the sea of ice far from the village. He stayed late. It became dark while he was still a long way from home. As he was walking along, the Tanhuk suddenly appeared before him and began to cross back and forth in his path. The young man tried to pass and escape, but could not. The Tanhuk kept in front of him, do what he might, as he could not think of anything else. He suddenly took a fish out of his basket and threw it at the Tanhuk. When he threw the fish, it was frozen hard, but as it was thrown and came near the Tanhuk, it turned suddenly back, passing over the young man's shoulder, fell into his basket again, where it began to flap about, having become alive, because the skeleton is energy, and so the energy reanimated the fish, gave it new life. That's the complex. Then the fisherman pulled off one of his dogskin mittens and threw it at the Tanhuk. And as it fell near the spirit, the mitten suddenly changed into a dog, which ran growling and snarling around the apparition, distracting its attention. So these energies are really complexes. This is just it's a different way of viewing the energies. And the complexes, the more they're disassociated, the more they're split off, the farther away they are from consciousness, the earlier they start. They're born. Complexes are born from the archetypal energies. And they're born through violence. They're born through a trauma. So they're born through violence when they arise. They're not happy-go-lucky because they were never happy-go-lucky. Their existence started out early on as a violent awakening to the reality of existence. And now you want me to let the complex know that it needs a day off. Complex doesn't need a day off. You need a day off. Complex is activated. It's ready to go. It's on a mission. Nobody steps in its way. So the more you hold on to the complex, the more tenacious it becomes. And it tells you this is about winning, and I don't want you to win. And if you're conscious, you would say something, you would qualify it and say, even though I am conscious that is childish, I don't care. That's the complex kind of like talking out logic. I don't care. Because this is my consciousness. My consciousness was erupted into existence like a volcano. Letting that go, letting the volcano go, letting it die, it's hard. But we have smaller complexes that arise that are treatable. But the further away from consciousness it is, the more dangerous it is to consciousness. The more dangerous it is to you. Because then it threatens your life. Then suddenly you're talking about things that are hurting yourself or doing something because it's so disassociated. It comes out of nowhere. It's like, what the hell was that?
Yeah, I kind of call it like a false prophet. Like you can call it like, oh, that's my angel voice guide. And so you might get your way and it will calm down because the complex got its way.
Yeah.
And you might feel calm, but it's not what it is that you need. It is the complex has taken over, and it's the false truth. It is leading down the wrong path.
Sitting there going, I'm calm.
Mm-hmm.
It's not calm. I am calm. And it was to hold the charge at the same time going, I could go on. No, you can't. No, I can go on. And so the complex is tenacious, independent, argumentative, disruptive, beguiling.
Disassociated, mostly, yeah.
And disassociated. Yeah. And so wherever it hits you from, as Lisa eloquently put it, wherever it hits you from, it suddenly talks to you like it's a god. Oh, that's my spirit voice. That's my spirit animal. That's my angel. That's the voice that keeps me alive. And it has done for so many years. You know, so it has, and then so you could feel the sense of power you're giving it, right? It's like you're worshiping at its altar. It's kept me alive for all these years. Look at it. It's like so magnificent. You know, how can I not trust it? Mm-hmm. You're telling me not to trust myself. Mm-hmm. You know, and what's funny is that the complex acts indignant. Hilarious. It acts indignant. It's like, I cannot believe you would. Why? It acts indignant. So another thing you learn about a complex. Now, I'm kind of baffled at times as why it does that. I think it's just not conscious. It acts indignant because it's not conscious. Its consciousness is based on the eruption that occurred. It's not conscious of this other aspect. It's not aware. Because it is the God, it's not aware of these other aspects that are going on. that I'm keeping you from enjoying yourself or creating relationships or falling in love or feeling free or not to be terrified of other people. I don't see those aspects. And if they do exist, as the complex would say, if they do exist, they're not my problem. They should be fine. My problem is to make sure that you are safe.
Mhm.
That's my problem.
Mhm.
And the only way I could keep you safe is by treating you like your shit. That's the only way. So the complex comes in this form where it mushrooms, and the mushroom gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And in this case, in this chapter, they turn into spirits, ghosts, and demons, and um, heads without bodies. Um, Eric's fairy tale. It's it's fascinating. It's fascinating how we see the complexes, how we identify them, how we put them in stories, and then how we give them different names, but it actually confuses what they really are. It's almost like we're giving them cover identities. Oh, that's a ghost. Nah, that's a spirit. Nah. Oh, that voice is probably my mother's. We give them these identities. We give them false identities. We keep them hidden. We keep them far away from self because that's what they want. They don't want to be identified. They don't want to be treated. They don't want to be talked to. You shouldn't be talking to me. I should be talking to you. That's the attitude. You shouldn't be talking to me. I should be talking to you. And when you talk to it, it gets pissed. It gets irritated. It gets vindictive. It gets defensive. It gets entrenched. It wants to take a shovel and take you apart and then bury you somewhere. That's, it doesn't like it. Doesn't like the disruption. And sometimes it could come across very violent.
Yeah.
The more rage it has, the more anger, the more it builds up, it becomes more and more violent. People who end up on a mass shooting spree, that's called being possessed by the complex. You are in complete, utter possession of the complex because what you believe you are doing is godlike. As soon as you believe that, then you're possessed by the complex. That what you do has magical powers. That's the complex. The complex has magical powers. Not you. The complex does. Any thoughts, Eric?
I think it even, I of course agree 100% with everything I've just heard. I think in addition to it not liking us talking to it, it doesn't like when others talk to us about it either. I mean, she goes, where is it? She goes, untie his feet. They are bound with cord. But he was too badly frightened to obey. So complex didn't like him hearing that. So the complex just made him more frightened, too frightened to even do anything about it. Except he threw his other mitten That was, just hoping something would stick.
Yeah. Throwing the mitten. It turns into an animal spirit, because it's being hit by energy, by vast amounts of energy that is localized and being held together through a feeling tone, to this feeling state. And that's how the energy is held. That's why when you rub up against it, it messes with you big time.
Mhm.
It could scare you out of a place. You could feel spooked or terrified or like just weirded out, paranoid. You start to like move and it's like, what is that? And then you chalk it off as having like a weird day or something. But that's not what you experienced. You did experience that. That has a form. And we know this because we work with people who have a lot of disturbance. And so you come up against it and they swear up and down it's not them. They don't feel that way. They don't think that way. They want to do the treatment. They really want to be feeling better. They really want to get better. And then all this resistance arises, like armies that were lying in wait. You don't know where they're coming from. You're like looking, going, hello? I thought we had a treatment going. What? No, no, no.
And oftentimes they don't know they're fighting you.
No, yeah.
Oh yeah, they do. They're like, you can look in this closet, but not that closet. You
Yeah.
can't go there. It's like, well, this is not how it works.
They make side deals with the complex.
They negotiate.
The ego negotiates, whereas like, okay, you give me Sunday off and maybe
Yeah.
we'll do one more treatment, but Sunday off.
And that probably happens more often than what I was saying. But I'm also saying that there are times when they don't know that they're fighting you.
No, they're not conscious. That's right.
Yeah, that's all
Yeah,
I'm
we
saying.
agree. No, we agree on this point.
Yeah,
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. What you're saying is exactly right, because what it is that my consciousness is limited to my state, my state of being. And I was born from a trauma. My state of being is born out of trauma. So my reaction to the world is of that trauma. And so I'm not aware of anything else out there. That's, if it's there, great, but really it has nothing to do with me. I think a lot of people say that's another complex. It has nothing to do with me. What do you mean it has nothing to do with you? It's like you're a human being on the planet. What do you mean it has nothing to do with me? Of course it does. But this is where it's this is where it sharpens its teeth, and it takes a bite out of you. And it could hold you there. It could hold you for a day. It could hold you for a week. It could hold you for a month. But when you're released from it, you feel exhausted. You feel literally exhausted by it. And you're sitting there feeling like all these emotions are coming across you. They feel like waves happening to you because it just released you. It had you and it just released you. And so, yeah, you're going to sabotage treatment. You're going to sabotage relationship. You're going to sabotage education. You're going to sabotage your relationship with your boss that's good. And you're going to sabotage, you're going to sabotage, you're going to sabotage. Because how do I prove my point? If everything is going well for you, where's my bread and butter? How do I make my existence? What do you mean things are going well for you? Things have never gone well for you. Don't you remember? Because that's all it remembers. The complex only remembers the trauma. So its whole narrative is built around the trauma. Or it's not even a complete trauma, it's a fragment of the trauma.
Mm.
It's kind of filled in some spaces. It's when you are working with somebody and the person you're working with is dedicated and smart and professional and educated and done all the things that you do to make yourself better in the world, and then you start the treatment. We're talking about young and advanced motor processing. You start the treatment and the complex looks at you and says, what the fuck is this? Who are you? Why are you here? You should not be here. This is not your territory. And you're stung by this like reaction. And what you're facing is the complexes are consolidated. They're sitting there and wait. They've taken their game to another level. They're living side by side. So it's always kind of like, oh, I've done all this work and I've been in therapy before and great. But then we're going after the complexes. And if you have seen a episode of Star Wars, there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of parts coming after you. Anyway, so this week we talked about the fairy tales. Eric, Lisa, thank you very much. The fairy tales were fascinating. And the complexes. And we can't seem to roam very far away from the complexes. They seem to like to jump in our face, like to mess with us, like to create a new reality, like they did last week. They destroyed the podcast, I could tell you. They were all in an uproar. Nobody wanted the podcast. Everybody wanted to go after everything else. And that is just the complexes. They trigger each other. And when they trigger each other, it's like a round robin. It's like, oh, here's your turn. Oh, no, it's my turn. No, it's your turn. No, it's my turn. And everybody is moving in accordance with how the complexes are interacting with each other, how they're pushing off each other, how they're antagonizing each other, how they're generating more and more conflict. Anyway, I thought it was interesting what we experience. I mean, we talk about it theoretically, but these are experiences. We have these experiences. We know what happens. We know what disruption looks like and how we can be disrupted. Not to say that we are completely not in control of what's going on. We're not. We have a lot of mini parts that move along, like harmony with us, that we're all moving in the same direction. Are we on the same team? I think is the title. Don't we have the same goals? Not really. Sometimes no. Anyway, so with that, I am Dr. Lav El Samurai. This is the IFC's Individuation Podcast. And we will be back very soon with the next chapter of von Franz's Archetypal Figures of the Magical. And we come back with the demonic father. And I think this is a very rich chapter because we're going to have a lot to say about the father complex and what it does to us, how as men or as women, Lisa, how does it change us? How does it transform us? How is our relationship to it define us in a lot of ways. So until next week, would you guys, do you want to say anything to our listeners, Eric?
Thank you for listening. Have a good evening.
Lisa?
Thanks for joining us. It's
Thank
been a
you.
pleasure.
And as we say, as our new tradition dictates, we at the Institute for Conflict, we are stating, using our affirmations that we use in the treatment. And we are reaching out to all of you across the world. And we want you to remember these words as we move forward as a people who care about each other. And what happens to our next generations on this planet. So I am not afraid. Lisa?
I am not afraid.
I am not afraid.
And from the Institute for Conflict, we thank you, and we will see you very soon.